Hello, friends. Welcome you to the Smooth MOOC on Universal Design, Accessibility Planning, and Social Inclusion. This MOOC has been created under the Global Center of Spatial Methods for Urban Sustainability at the Technical University of Berlin, funded by the German Academic Exchange Services, that is DAAD. This module has been curated under the aegis of Laboratory of Inclusive Design at IIT Roorkee, India. Welcome you to this Module 9, Session B, which is focusing on policy landscapes for accessibility and inclusion. Friends, my name is Professor Gaurav Raheja, and I am working as a professor in the Department of Architecture and Planning at IIT Roorkee, India. We had the previous module on policies for inclusion from the international perspective. This module and this session focuses on Indian policies and measures for inclusion. We have seen that the evolution of the disability acts and policies across the globe actually dawn upon the huge civil rights movements that have happened over a period of several decades and the past century. For India also, the story was not much different, but 1980s witnessed the consolidation of these demands from various groups towards disability rights and inclusion, leading to the setting up of Rehabilitation Council of India in 1986. This led forward in 1995 a major protest by the disability rights activist Javed Abidi, leading to the passing of the landmark Persons with Disabilities Act 1995, in brackets equal opportunities, protection of rights, and full participation. This brings us to the point to understand and look back how the national policies towards inclusion evolved in India. It started with 1986 setting up of Rehabilitation Council of India. 1987 the Mental Health Act was passed. 1992 the Rehabilitation Council of India Act was passed. 95 the Persons with Disabilities Act came into existence, followed by 1996 the National Policy for Older Persons was passed in the country, and 1999 came the National Trust Act, followed by 2001 when the new national policy for empowerment of women was introduced. So if you see this spectrum of the evolution of these civic right movements from persons with disabilities to elderly and women, it has been an evolving idea. In 2006, India saw the national policy for persons with disabilities. 2011, the Universal Design India principles were enshrined. And 2011, there was further a national policy on senior citizens, followed by the National Policy for Children in 2013, and 2014 Handbook on Barrier Free and Accessibility released by the Central Public Works Department. 2015, India spearheaded the Accessible India campaign, which was launched by none other than the Honorable Prime Minister of India. 2016, the landmark Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act was passed in 2016, which was way ahead from the earlier Act of 1995. 2019, the Transgender Persons Bill was passed. 2021, the Harmonized Guidelines and Standards for Universal Accessibility in India were released, of which I remain the Roorkee author in collaboration with National Institute of Urban Affairs. In 2022, the Accessible Tourism Guidelines were formulated, which still remain under review before they could be launched in public domain. The idea is to say that the Indian side of policy evolution reflects a very progressive path. I'm sure there will always be a scope of hastening certain dimensions of the policy, but it's equally important to see what is the federal government structure to regulate this. So, in Indian government systems, we have the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. The very term social justice and empowerment reflects an inclusive dimension of humanity. Department of Social Justice and Empowerment is one vertical which works under the ministry for the scheduled castes, socially and educationally backward classes, denotified tribes, economically backward classes, and senior citizens. At the same time, under the same ministry, there is a separate vertical which is for the Department of Empowerment of People with Disabilities. The Accessible India campaign, also known as the Sugamya Bharat Abhiyan, was launched by the Department of Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities through the Honorable Prime Minister of India. This campaign was launched on December 3, which is the world's International Day for Persons with Disabilities in 2015. This, this campaign intended to bring accessibility in India on a forefront of its discussion and implementation, keeping the three vertical sections, that is built environment, transportation sector, and the ICT ecosystem. The idea of Accessible India campaign was to revolutionize the idea of inclusivity through these segments of built environment, mobility, and information and communication technologies. The campaign adopted a multi-pronged strategy with following key components. The first one was leadership endorsements of the campaign. The second was mass awareness. Third, capacity building through workshops. Fourth, interventions through legal framework, technology solutions, and resource generation. And finally, fifth, to leverage the corporate sector efforts in a public private partnership. This is how the Act's front page looks like through the Gazette of India, and drawing from the United Nations Convention for Rights for Persons with Disabilities, it was introduced in 2016. The former Indian Act of Persons with Disabilities identified seven disability types. The new Act, passed in 2016, reflected now a big shift from 7 to 21 disability types, which includes blindness, low vision, leprosy cured persons, hearing impairment, locomotor disabilities, dwarfism, intellectual disabilities, mental illness, autism spectrum disorder, cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, chronic neurological conditions, specific learning disabilities, multiple sclerosis, speech and language disability, thalassemia, hemophilia, sickle cell disease, multiple disabilities including deaf blindness, acid attack victims, and Parkinson's disease. Some of the highlights of this act being Section 40, which talks about the central government shall, in consultation with the Chief Commissioner, formulate rules for persons with disabilities, laying down the standards of accessibility for the physical environment, transportation, information and communication, including appropriate technologies and systems and other facilities and services provided to the public in urban and rural areas. This section highlights the need for accessibility standards in the country. Section 41, which clearly states that the appropriate governments shall take suitable measures to provide facilities for persons with disabilities at bus stops, railway stations, and airports, conforming to the accessibility standards relating to parking spaces, toilets, ticketing machines, counters, etc. Second point it says is to access to all modes of transport that conform the design standards, including retrofitting old modes of transport wherever technically feasible and safe for persons with disabilities, economically viable, and without entailing major structural changes in design. The Act very clearly is on the direction of non discriminatory practices. It is imbibing the philosophy to say that once we develop standards, let's also delve deeper into it to transform our infrastructures. And then it talks about accessible roads to address mobility necessary for persons with disabilities. Section 45(1) further talks that all existing public buildings shall be made accessible in accordance with the rules formulated by the central government within a period not exceeding 5 years from the date of notification of such rules. It is fixing a timeline, provided that the central government may grant extension of time to the states on a case to case basis for adherence to this provision depending on their state of preparedness and other related parameters. Section 45(2) talks about that the appropriate government and the local authorities shall formulate and publish an action plan based on prioritization for providing accessibility in all their buildings and spaces, providing essential services such as all primary health centers, civil hospitals, schools, railway stations, and bus stops. Section 46 further talks about services. The service providers, whether government or private, shall provide services in accordance with the rules on accessibility formulated by the central government under Section 40 within a period of 2 years from the date of notification of such rules. Friends, the RPWD Act currently is the spine of inclusive transformation of this nation. States which have notified the state rules regarding this act have been indicated in the landscape of this image of India, where you see the orange dots reflect how this act has actually spearheaded across different states in terms of the state regulatory affairs. And this is how it has led us today to the journey forward. In 2021, I got this opportunity through the National Institute of Urban Affairs to draft and develop the harmonized guidelines and standards for universal accessibility in India under the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. These documents and guidelines today are part of the national landscape for implementation and access. So I do recommend you to go through these guidelines for understanding the accessibility landscape for India in terms of these regulations. Further, we have also drafted the accessibility guidelines and standards for higher education institutions and universities for the University Grants Commission. This was done through a team of professionals from various sectors of disability, legal, and educational backgrounds, and I had the chance to chair this committee and produce these documents as guidelines as an end outcome of this. which is also now a national document for inclusive education or basically for accessibility for higher education campuses. The guidelines for tourism, for accessible tourism in India, were also prepared in 2022. They are still under review by the ministry before they could be launched for the public domain. The idea is to show that the story of Indian accessibility and inclusive spectrum through policy landscape is going towards a transformational journey. It definitely is a very welcome step, and we are looking forward how these guidelines, these policies, these standards are complemented with strong actions on the ground which enforce the idea of accessibility and inclusivity as part of our environmental experiences, which one looks forward for a non-discriminatory way forward. With that, friends, we come to the conclusion of Module 9, Session B. We will look forward to see you in Module 10 on Design Thinking for Accessibility and Social Inclusion, to be led by an architect, Shreya Shetty, who leads the principal consulting on Ochre Design from Bengaluru, India. With those words, I believe we would have by now got a fair idea of how the policy landscapes are moving and where are the gaps for future works which correlate between policy and practice. With that, I thank you for a very patient listening and your participation in this MOOC. We look forward to see you in the next module and the next sessions. Till then, see you. Bye bye.